Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Justin Guerrero, and today I'm going to break down the meaning behind the 1969 song Fortunate Son by the band Creedence Clearwater Revival and find the song's connection to U.S. history and pop culture. The meaning behind it. To start off, Sons was released during the chaotic period of the Cold War and the Vietnam War, and was specifically written by John Fogerty, this guy right here, who was a former member of the band as well as a veteran of the Vietnam War, which is an important fact to remember when going through this analysis, as John Fogerty will go on the record on multiple occasions to say that his reasoning for writing Fortunate Sons was to essentially criticize certain aspects of the Vietnam War, with the military drafting process specifically being the main reason, as Fogerty himself would be drafted into the U.S. Army in 1966. I come to realize how only the average middle-class American male was really the only ones actually fighting and dying for this war, while the rich and the political elite mostly avoided it by any means possible, which serves as an explanation of why he wrote the song the way he did, as a good majority of the lyrics in The Fortunate Sons serve as a message to the audience how the common American was sent to war and encouraged to fight for a country, while a lot of the elite stood back and hypocritically cheered on the war effort and patriotism. The most prominent example of this can be seen with section 3 of the song, as Fogerty would use metaphors to describe his point on how some folks are born silver spoon in hand lord, though they help themselves, yeah, but when the taxman comes to the door, the house looks like a rummage sale. End quote. This song's meaning and the context behind it is primarily why I'm interested in breaking it down. Because Fortunate Sons, alongside with other Vietnam era songs, are often misinterpreted by people then, and specifically with people today, which isn't surprising, as media over the last 50 years has used the song to label certain groups or ideologies in film, television, politics, and even video games to either portray the song as a pro-war or a pro-American anthem. When in reality, the song was simply calling out the hypocrisy that millions of Americans and veterans saw with the political establishment and with the Vietnam War itself. Now you look over here, you have Forrest Gump, which they did use the song inappropriately sometimes when they had the scenes when Gump was in Vietnam. You had the radios playing the song, and they usually set up the scene to be extremely pro-America. You had the guys in the background grilling with the barbecue, I think it was. But it's not nearly as bad as they would do with video games like such as Call of Duty Black Ops, where the song would be literally playing in the background of a mission when we're essentially mowing down northern Vietnamese soldiers. And then, of course, you have shows such as Family Guy that would essentially make fun of the fact that Hollywood would essentially use Fortunate Son as a way to describe a scene, how pro-American the characters in a particular film or TV show would be, when when in reality the song was heavily criticizing America, and they often misinterpreted soldiers and how they felt throughout the war. Well, usually, but not all the time. Historical connections. The connection the song Fortunate Sons make with U.S. history is strong and pretty significant when considering the time the song came out in the late 60s. The reason why is mainly due to how public perception of the Vietnam War had drastically changed from where it began officially in 1964, which essentially led to the song being created and becoming infamous for its criticism on the war itself. As during the beginning of the conflict, Americans at that time believed the war was necessary to prevent communism or the Red Menace from spreading throughout the Eastern world and becoming a bigger threat. Plus, the war was initially accepted by the American public The war was essentially accepted by the general public. Where was I? Because of how politicians like President Johnson assured the people that American interference into Vietnam would be short and a decisive effort to contain the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. But by 1967, the war had escalated exponentially as over half a million Americans would make their way into Vietnam. As a result of the signing of the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which in quick summary gave President Johnson the congressional authority to take whatever precaution is needed to repel any armed attack against U.S. forces in the region, as the Northern Viet Cong Army and the U.S.-backed Southern Vietnamese Army would suffer heavy combatants and civilian casualties due to the usage of unconventional tactics such are like chemical warfare, spike traps, rat tunnels, and so on. But despite the similar casualty numbers, the U.S. was constantly at a disadvantage, which is mostly because of how unprepared they were to fight in a damp, swampy region. As you can see here, you can see soldiers essentially struggling to carry this injured soldier, essentially miles back to base, which had been a hellish nightmare considering on the mud and God knows what disease happened to be in the area. Anyways, because of how violent and prolonged the war got, the anti-war movement picked up traction and became a fixture to counter culture ideology that was growing in American society, with younger generations losing faith in the system. Not to mention, the live media coverage of the war would amplify anti-war sentiments throughout the country, as millions of Americans witnessed horrific images and recordings of war and its effect throughout Vietnam and its people. In fact, one of the more notorious examples of this would be the My Lai massacre, which took place on March 16, 1968. That basically involved U.S. troops gunning down a village of southern Vietnamese civilians, as the officer in charge of the group believed that the village was conspiring with the Viet Cong, leading to approximately 240 innocent Vietnamese being killed. This event, like many others, such as President Nixon's Great Silent Majority speech in 1969, in which President Nixon basically stated that there was a silent majority of people in the nation that supported the war but refused to show their support in fear of retaliation from the anti-war advocates, only compounded the distrust and hatred the common American held against the government. Now, when it comes to the anti-war movement, there's generally a lot of misconceptions thrown around with it, as entertainment media and a lot of the uninformed public often believe that the anti-war movement mostly consisted of crazy drug-induced hippies, when in reality it often consisted of multiple groups that in itself prominently consisted of young college-educated adults that protested in the thousands against the war and the federal government for prolonging American intervention programs in Asia, South America, and the Middle East. With hippies and even war veterans being a part of the movement as separate fringe groups, which leads me to one of the more interesting ways Fortunate Sons connects to U.S. history, as a lot of soldiers and veterans who got out of the Vietnam War early, like John Fogerty, like John Kerry as well, viewed the war as a pointless effort that costed too many lives, which is why a lot of these veterans would become a part of the anti-war movement, as groups like the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, or VVAW, would publicly take to the streets of Washington, D.C. throughout the late 60s and the early 70s to protest against the politicians who drafted them into the war. And as you can see from the pictures, many of the protesters usually held signs that criticized political and the economic elite, With right here, you can see we won't fight another rich man's war with a bunch of veterans in the back, mostly just walking peacefully. And a lot of them would do this because in their mind, they were the ones that were forced into a deadly war for patriotism, while the people who saw the conflict evaded the draft by using their positions and connection to avoid military service, which ties back to why John Fogerty was so explicit, expressing how he and other veterans believed that the elite were hypocritical warmongers because, as the name implies, they were the fortunate sons that didn't have to risk their lives for America or fear the possibility of serving prison time for evading their draft cards. And this could be further seen when looking at section 2 of the song, with Fogerty clearly expressing how he and other men in his position had no real way getting out of the draft, as the section goes on to claim that it ain't me, I ain't no senator's son, it ain't me, I ain't no fortunate one, end quote. In conclusion, Fortunate Sons by Creedence Clearwater Revival, in my opinion, perfectly encapsulates the general perception most Americans developed throughout the duration of the Vietnam War, as John Fogerty's criticism of the political and the financial elite forcing the common American to fight a losing war, while the fortunate members of the political and financial establishment sneaked their way out of serving in the war, were often viewpoints that a lot of Americans of all different backgrounds had about the Vietnam War and the establishment itself. And I think the best way to end this video off is by saying what I think is the most important lyric from the song, due to how this line in particular illustrates how deep the disconnect was between the common American slash soldier and with a member of the elite, with the lyrics themselves being, yeah, some folks in here are spangled eyes, they send you down to war, and when you ask them how much should we give, they only answer more, 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 end quote. And that's it for the video. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day. See ya.